Hi, everybody. Good morning. I love to call and response. Thank you first to Rob and Claire and anyone else who was involved in organizing this conference. I do a lot of these. I'm on the whole conference circuit, and I just want to say that I think it is the schedule that you guys have today and Monday is awesome. I don't say that to everybody. I think it demonstrates some real leadership and recognition of the times that we're in to have a conference that's so focused on the practical application of our values. And so I just think it's really cool, and I wanted to recognize that. I also really, Rob's presentation is so awesome, and it's like, God, I love libraries so much. We have so many amazing things. Like, look at all this stuff, and it's so happy and wonderful. And then I come in and I'm like, crisis. Sorry, gonna be a little bit of a bummer for the next hour, but I'm also gonna tell you some positive things. It's just that we are in some difficult times, to put it mildly, and we do have to recognize that, unfortunately. So Rob gave a little brief introduction of me, but I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. So my name is Alison Macrina. My pronouns are she and her. I started Library Freedom Project about 8 years ago. Most of my experience prior to that had been in public libraries, although I had a couple stints in academic libraries, and I love y'all too. Wait, quick show of hands. Who's the academics in here? And then publics, okay, overwhelmingly more school libraries? Anybody school libraries? No? Why do we never have them we gotta figure out some school librarian solidarity. It's the same thing in every state, right? They're still in school. Okay, fair, good point. Any other types of libraries that I had not acknowledged? Okay, cool. All libraries, you said? Law libraries, yeah, law libraries. Any law libraries? All right, cool, we love them too. They're also in school. So I started Library Freedom Project about 8 years ago because I had mainly worked in public libraries, and I was just really interested in, particularly what was happening at that time was the Snowden revelations. I get a little obsessed about different news stories, right? I get really hyper-focused on them. And the reason that one piqued my interest in particular and kind of made me start thinking about the applications for my job is that obviously it's a whole thing about privacy. And I became a librarian in part because I was super motivated by our specific values. And the Snowden revelation started making me think about how there were a lot of ways that I felt like we would sort of pay lip service to a lot of these values, but we weren't really doing a whole lot about them in practice. And so I started to try to be really particular about incorporating privacy into my work at my public library. And that just basically snowballed, and I started to apply for grant funding, and I got it. Shout out to IMLS. They've also given me a ton of money. We love them. Thanks, guys. And so here I am today. Library Freedom Project has been going 8 years strong, and we are now focused on all of our library values and contexts, not just privacy, also intellectual freedom. I like to refer to the whole set of them as information democracy, meaning, getting people the information that they need in ways that are equitable, and also recognizing whatever the barriers are to equitable information access. So my organization, it's a couple of things, right? So we do a lot of direct trainings for libraries, conferences, workshops, and that sort of thing. We also have a community of practice. This is a cute little illustration that someone did of one of our meetups. Yes, that's a campfire. We like to do fun things. So our community of practice is basically, right now it's about 150 library workers around the country working in every type of library context, in almost every state, every type of community, big cities, super small rural places, and everything in between. And what we do is we work together on that practical application of our values in our work. And we also support each other. We talk through whatever issues we're facing. We make programming together. We work on policy and resources and all sorts of stuff. And it's a community built on a lot of solidarity and care for each other. The way that you become part of the community, we used to have intensive trainings that we ran. We're still kind of figuring out what our membership model is going to be going forward, but if you're interested in becoming part of Library Freedom Project, we would love to have you. And I'm going to have my contact information at the end of these slides, so just get in touch and we can talk about what that looks like. What we're going to be doing a lot in the next few years is hosting meetings that are basically look a lot like this. Locally focused, bringing library workers together to talk about the issues that we're facing and strategize about them together. The next one that we have is in Portland. After that, we're gonna be in Atlanta. After that, we're gonna be in Boston. And I just mentioned that to give you a sense of like the scale that we're doing. So hopefully we'll have one in this area of the country sometime soon, and we can invite you all to it. The other thing that we offer as Library Freedom Project, in addition to our community of librarians, we're connected with a huge network of people working on civil rights issues, technology. We have a lot of lawyer contacts. I've said context a lot and I said that wrong. We have a lot of lawyer contacts, and so basically other people who are sort of fellow travelers helping us to understand the environment that we're operating in and help us to build out some of our resources, and also to help us understand like what some of those civil liberties obligations look like for library workers. So I have quite a long agenda this morning, and there's two problems that I have with public speaking. I do a lot of it, but one, I don't know how to go only on my time. I've never figured that out. So whatever we don't get to in this morning, come to my afternoon workshop and we'll talk about whatever the rest is. Hopefully I'll at least like have it done at a sort of like not weird stopping point, but we'll figure that out as we go. The other thing is I'm really bad at making my slides like a lot of text. I've tried to have like beautiful images and memes and funny things, but I always end up with a lot of text, so my bad. It's a lot of information. Also, I have heard some feedback that it is better for accessibility for sharing slides later so that it can be read by a screen reader. So just letting you know what to expect. So what we're gonna talk about this morning, I'm gonna share some context for our current conditions, what we're up against right now in this environment of extreme hostility towards libraries and intellectual freedom challenges. Then I'm gonna talk about how our values, our library values, as well as other values of civil liberties can really support us in this environment. And then I'm gonna get into a toolkit for library defense that I've built through doing these kinds of events with librarians around the country. This toolkit has a bunch of different components: messaging, policy, coalition building, staff training, and more. There are definitely some things that this toolkit misses. You know, there's other things that work, I think, in this environment, but I think this is a pretty strong foundation for helping to support us through what we're facing. And then in the afternoon workshop, which is at 1:10 p.m., we'll do anything that I don't get to this morning, plus hopefully we'll have some opportunities for role-playing some challenge scenarios. Don't worry, I'm not gonna make anybody get up to the front. I don't think that's like a very effective method of like working on this stuff. We'll do like a tabletop role play and then we'll share, right? And obviously more time for questions. Also, hopefully we'll have a little time for questions at the end of this hour. So, just to situate us all, a shared understanding of what we are facing. So, you know, I might not need to explain all of this to you, right? You're librarians working in 2023. I think you probably are at least somewhat aware of the environment of extreme challenges and hostility to our work, to our materials, to our communities. But what I want to acknowledge is that this is not just random acts from a few disgruntled individuals. This is an organized movement with significant funding behind it, even if it's one kind of individual person who is showing up against your library, they are being influenced by this movement if they're not already directly a part of it. It's an anti-democratic movement in that it attempts to impose its rigid ideology on the rest of the population, no matter what their beliefs are. It's an anti-speech movement because it is an attempt to silence different parts of public discourse in favor of this rigid ideology. And it's a small movement, but it's a very well-organized one, and it is gaining in power. It's not going away anytime soon. Their main targets are three things: LGBTQ materials of all kinds, especially for children, materials about race and racism, particularly Black history, and anything, recognizing the sordid history of slavery and the treatment of indigenous people in this country, and as well as comprehensive sex education. So I have this infographic. PEN America did a great study about book banning. And I should acknowledge here, I have a resource list that goes with these slides, and I'll make sure that the conference organizers get it all. But so this report is in that resource list. And a couple things I want to say about this. One, this is already almost a year out of date, right? Because this is June 30th, 2022. This movement is growing exponentially each year. And so, I don't think these particular numbers have changed in terms of the percentage of what is getting banned or challenged, but just to note that the numbers have grown significantly since then. The other thing I want to note about this slide is that we know that some enormous percentage of book challenges go unreported. Again, I think that is it's maybe still reflected here because this is just showing you the types of things that are getting banned and challenged. But I think it is important to note that as big as we know that this problem is, it's actually bigger than we know. So you can see there's two subject areas that are most frequently challenged, right? One of them is LGBTQ themes, protagonists, or prominent or secondary characters. So even a secondary character that's gay or trans in a book is prime for, the biggest challenge category. The second one is protagonists or secondary characters of color. Not even necessarily a book about race or racism, but just having characters of color. And then, of course, you have materials with sexual content, titles with issues of race and racism, themes of rights and activism, and so on and so forth. A couple other things I want to say. I noted already that this is a movement with significant funding behind it. We could do a whole entire keynote just about the money and the power behind this organized movement. But just to say here that it is a multi-decade effort, basically started at least as early as the 1970s as a backlash to progressive change, specifically a backlash to gains in the civil rights movement. And it has kind of waxed and waned since then. But I think what we've seen in the last 13 years or so since the passage of Citizens United, which allowed for enormous amounts of anonymous money to be used as political speech, we've seen a bigger explosion of this kind of funding because a lot of it is totally anonymous, or it's sort of hidden through different political action committees and things like that. And then in the last few years, I think the reason why we're seeing this enormous challenge environment is a few things. One, a lot of sort of quasi-grassroots groups that grew out of anti-masking and anti-vaccination in schools. This billionaire-run movement found those people and started propping them up with more funding and more support. And then, of course, the 2020 movements for racial justice, as well as significant gains in LGBTQ rights and representation. So the combination of all those three things, that kind of progressive change that we've seen, has resulted in more commitment from this organized movement. So I just want to note a couple things. If you're interested in learning more about like this specific billionaire run movement, it's like, you know, the Koch donor network and other big names that you've probably heard of. There's a couple things. We're hosting a training on June 8th at 7 p.m. You can RSVP to info@libraryfreedom.org. It's all about how we learn when this money is at work in our community. So there's a word for it, it's called power mapping. And so using different open source tools like Little Sis or SEC donations or things like that to kind of figure out where this money is and where it's going. So we're hosting that training. And then also a couple book recommendations, one called Dark Money by Jane Mayer. Really fantastic book. And then one that's more specifically about academic environments, Free Speech and Koch Money, is about how the Koch donor network has manufactured the so-called campus free speech crisis. So I really recommend both those books to learn more about that environment. So just to note how we're seeing this movement show up in libraries as well as schools nationwide. So one is board takeover. And this can be one person on the board, one really disruptive person that manages to get their way onto the board, either through election or appointment. And usually the appointment, I was just in Wisconsin, and one of the public libraries in Wisconsin that has had enormous issues with book challenges, they have one really disruptive board member, and she got on the board because she kept harassing whatever the local version of the city council is, I forget what they call them up there, but she was harassing the city council enough that they were like, okay, fine, you can have a board seat. And now she's basically dismantling the library. You know, so even just one board member, if they aren't able to take board seats, they are showing up to board meetings in numbers. And you know how it is with a board meeting, right? You know, library board meetings are usually pretty sleepy affairs, right? No one's there. So even just 5 people showing up to a board meeting feels like 100 people. We're seeing board members who are not part of this movement get threatened. Librarians, as well as teachers, are directly targeted and facing discipline. This is one thing that we're seeing, in particular, how this shows up in academic environments. Like if you run a program that is, you know, about LGBT issues, or you have any kind of public event that is about these issues that are getting frequently challenged, then you become the problem. We're seeing, obviously, materials challenges, but also, in addition to book challenges, displays, programming, all sorts of other things that we offer. A lot of the legislators who are part of this opposition movement are smearing us as groomers. Everyone's heard this language before, saying some really sick and untrue things about our work and who we are. We're having our selection power challenged, both in the kind of direct sense of showing up at the board meetings and stuff, but also through attempts at passing local legislation. One example, not too far from where I live in Philly, is Central Bucks County, where they've changed the local policy so that parents are able to make decisions about what books are in the library and the librarians are not. All kinds of legislation introduced that is about protecting the children, but really it's about limiting speech and inhibiting our work. And one thing I want to say about this legislation is that a lot of it has failed. Every library has an amazing legislation tracker that I have in the resource list, and they've got 2 big sections of it. One is all the legislation, and then one is just legislation that's been proposed that would criminalize librarianship, and there's a number of those. I think there's something like 90 bills, not just the criminalization ones, but something like 90 bills that are in some state of going through committee or just in discussion of some kind around the country. And many of them fail, but that shouldn't necessarily, that we should still be concerned about them, because one example, I was in Virginia recently, and as part of getting ready to speak to the public library directors meeting in Virginia, I did some research I knew that they had some bad legislation that was introduced, and it had just failed. But the local paper interviewed one of these legislators, And he was super chipper about the whole thing. And he was like, listen, yeah, it failed this time, but we're gonna keep going. We're gonna either try to amend a different law, or we're gonna appeal. And then he said something that I think is really important for us to recognize. He said, Dobbs failed all the way to the top. So he's referring, of course, to legislation, criminalizing abortion, right? Getting rid of our reproductive rights. He said, Dobbs failed all the way to the top. So we're willing to go all the way to the top. And they're right about this, right? They recognize that if they go to the higher courts, if they continue to appeal, they're more likely to hit an ultra-conservative judge, maybe a Trump appointee, who will be more on their side. We're seeing, and so that's another thing to note about this movement, that they are not necessarily deterred by failure. We're seeing a lot of different kinds of direct confrontation and harassment from the opposition. One way that this has shown up significantly is at LGBTQ affirming Storytimes. So not just drag queen Storytimes, but just like pride Storytimes. We've seen the Proud Boys show up to a few different Storytimes. One of them was in San Francisco. And I think that's important to point out, right? Because this is happening everywhere. It's not just like the places you would think. Where I live in Philly, one of these opposition groups is about to have their annual conference. This is a group called Moms for Liberty that I'm gonna get into in a bit. I know, boo, hiss. Moms for Liberty, getting money from the Koch brothers, right? Say what? So they're having their annual conference in Philly in July, and they actually contacted the Free Library of Philadelphia to say, we will be protesting all of your Pride events because it's during Pride Month. Now, I don't know why they contacted I'm glad they did, right? It gives us some, it helps us, right? But what are the events that the library is hosting that weekend? It's like a Pride family picnic. Like the most wholesome stuff that you can imagine, and these people are gonna show up and protest and frighten children, but they're not above that, right? Another thing that we're seeing is library privatization. The innocuously named group, Library Systems and Services, LS&S, right? Yeah, folks are nodding their heads. One example is the Huntsville Public Library in Texas that had a bunch that was, embroiled in this challenged environment, and then it was an opportunity for this group to come in and privatize the library, which gets to the ultimate goal of this movement, is that even if it's just a random individual, even if it's just like, oh, I'm a concerned parent or whatever, the ultimate goal is about defunding and destroying the library as we know it. They know what the library is for, and they're against it. Some of their messaging, they're reflexively opposed to anything about LGBT issues, race, racism, DEI. Climate change is one that they've started to jump on significantly. They are fond of the so-called groomer narrative, parents' rights, protecting the children. Ron DeSantis is launching his presidential campaign next week, and his messaging is all about protect the kids, let kids be kids. A lot of these opposition groups are connected to DeSantis's PAC and to just typical Florida GOP type funding. They love to talk about libraries carrying porn. In general, they just believe that the government is corrupt, that the government has basically only a couple of functions, that it should provide police and military. It should protect private property, but any public services are bad and corrupt, and we have to get rid of them. They don't usually say that directly, but sometimes they do say it directly. Another thing from the PEN America study, something that they did that I thought was really useful in their study was they identified the groups that are behind a lot of these challenges, right? They're referring to them as book bans, but they're really talking about this whole challenge environment, the legislation, the harassment, et cetera. And they identified at least 50 groups, and among them, 8 groups that have at least 300 local or regional chapters. And so these are the ones that I'm really talking about when I talk about this organized and funded movement. Some of the examples, obviously Moms for Liberty, we've talked about already, and they have tons of links to, I keep referring to the Koch brothers, but that's not technically true. First of all, one of them's dead. I never remember which one. who care? Second, it's really a network of donors, right? That the Koch brothers are billionaires, that they have invested an enormous amount of their money into this movement, but it's not just them. It's the Bradley Foundation, it's the Scafee Foundation, it's the DeVos family. And so Koch donor network really refers to that whole environment, right? So Moms for Liberty is definitely getting funding from them. Campus Reform, Young America's Foundation, these are some more that we're seeing at the academic level, and so they do a lot of funding for student groups that are challenging their professors for having like DEI content in their classes. They're doing a lot of like suing their schools. They're going after individual faculty members or staff for being committed to DEI issues. Other things, Libs of TikTok is a big one. This is an account online that basically helps to create these harassment campaigns. I know that Tucker Carlson just lost his show, but the impact of his, the harm that man has done just alone can't really be overstated. And so this is how the network works, right? There's the funding to the specific groups, and then there's the pundits that like repeat the talking points, and then there's your sort of individuals like Libs of TikTok that like amplify it and help harass people. We're also seeing your typical far right, like January 6th type groups, Proud Boys, 3%ers, militia, and they're doing a lot of that direct confrontation. Other places, random Facebook groups that might not be part of this movement in a direct way, sorry, that's my alarm to take my medication, but I already took it. Might not be part of this movement in a direct way, but they're being influenced by it because it's highly influential. And then I want to note that some of those people might not even be directly hostile and might not even be poorly intentioned, but they're being fed this poison. They genuinely believe that the library is offering pornography, right? And so, I just want to note that because I think hopefully you will never face any of this, but you might face some of it where it's like, it is like a nice little homeschool mom and like, she's got the best of intentions, and obviously dealing with her is a little bit different than like dealing with the Proud Boys, right? But it is all of a piece. I just wanted to note this. This is a screenshot of the Twitter account of one of their big operatives. His name is Christopher Ruffo. And I think this is an important Twitter post that he made because they don't usually talk this plainly about their objectives, but he did in this tweet, and I think it's important, right? And the tweet says, "The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans." Now, I want to just challenge one thing he's saying. These things are actually not unpopular with Americans, right? That we saw how many people showed up for example, in 2020 for the George Floyd protests, right? That racial justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion are actually pretty popular ideas. There is a backlash against them, and that's who these people are speaking to, but they're also dishonest, right? That this is what he's talking about here, that they plainly take a term that's hard to understand, that actually doesn't have anything to do with most racial justice movement demands, like critical race theory. It's a legal concept. It just sounds scary, and then they amplify it, and they use all sorts of dishonesty to make it seem like something really outlandish. Ruffo is a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, and where does Manhattan Institute get their money from? From the Koch donor network. So I want to talk now about the ways that our values can support us through this environment. But the first thing I want to talk about is some of the ways that I think we have that our stated values are not helping us. And I'm talking about the dominant conversation about so-called library neutrality. That our popular understanding of what it means to be neutral, first of all, is incorrect. And second of all, I think is really hindering us in this environment of extreme hostility to Black, brown, immigrant, trans, and queer, and gay people. So what I'm talking about is the popular understanding of neutrality is this, that many, many people in the library world believe that our obligation to the First Amendment, our obligation to be viewpoint neutral means two things. One, that we have to somehow show all sides at all times, and two, that we can never take a position on anything. And it doesn't mean this, and I asked a lawyer, and I'm gonna tell you about that in a second, but I think that this really gets in our way because it ends up with like stuff that's really frankly ridiculous, right? Where we end up thinking like, okay, well, you know, I've heard from so many, yes, you can take in I have a cartoon, it's not all text. A lot of the responses to the challenge environment that we're in that I've heard, unfortunately, are like, well, you know, yeah, if we have books about LGBTQ experience and identities, then sure, we also have to have gay conversion books. Or if we have books about like racial justice or Black history, then we also have to have like racist books or something. And like, I'm glad to hear, like, see so many people like recognizing that this is patently ridiculous, but it is very common in the library world, unfortunately, and it comes down to this misunderstanding of what our free speech obligations are, but it is not that. Before I get into what it actually is, I also want to note something that I think is just an important framing for us to think about. Now, I know that this cartoon is really tiny, but I'm going to read it to you. So this is a philosophical concept introduced by a philosopher named Karl Popper, who wrote about the challenges to open society. So, like, what are the ways that democratic societies fail? And one of his more popular concepts is this, the paradox of tolerance. And it basically goes like this. Should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? And then it's like a Charlottesville type Nazi who's like, you want more tolerance? Respect my ideas. Like, so much for the tolerant left, right? But the question, should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? The answer is no. It's a paradox, but unlimited tolerance can lead to the extinction of tolerance. When we extend tolerance to those who are openly intolerant, the tolerant ones end up being destroyed and tolerance with them. Any movement that preaches intolerance and persecution must be outside of the law. As paradoxical as it may seem, defending tolerance requires to not tolerate the intolerant. It is a tongue twister. I note this because one of the things that I hear very often in the library world is, well, listen, you know, it's just the marketplace of ideas, right? Like we can just counter their bad speech with more speech, and that, you know, that's how we can respond to this. And frankly, that doesn't work. We can't argue with people whose position is that some people do not deserve humanity. That's not an argument that deserves any credence. And also, because this movement is funded by literal billionaires, there's never gonna be an equal power dynamic. We're never gonna be able to achieve this, like, you know, the marketplace of free speech is like, okay, well, I'm opening my little mom and pop shop right here, and then there's a Walmart next door, right? I can't compete with that. And so we shouldn't have to. So, how can we use our values as well as other civil rights and civil liberties to actually support us in this environment? So the first thing I want to say is that I went and found the most free speech absolutist lawyer that I could find. He's actually a friend of mine. His name is Will Creeley, and he works for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE. Guess where they get their money from? Exactly. So I asked him, I was like, can you explain to me what the actual demands are of the First Amendment on librarians, right? Does it mean that we have to show all sides at all times? Does it mean that we're not allowed to have like a pride display or a Black Lives Matter display? And he said, absolutely not. All that it means is we cannot discriminate against people based on their views. So yes, we have to like let them use the meeting room, right? But it does not prevent us from having our own values. So anytime you hear this argument, oh, we can't do Pride Month stuff because of neutrality. Or if we're gonna do Pride Month stuff, we have to like have some other, so whatever the other side is. No, the library can have its own values. And in fact, it already does. And we're gonna get to that in a second. The other thing is, we get really, I think, hyper-focused on the First Amendment, which, make no mistake, I think is enormously important, and like there's a reason why it's the first one. But like, first of all, this is an aside, but I love to mention, like, you know, we're obsessed with the First Amendment, and we talk about it like it's this thing that like can't be challenged in any way. We don't do that with the Second Amendment, right? People can say, I'm against that. Or like, I think there should be major restrictions on how people are able to get guns. Also, I love to point out the context that the framers were in, where this was the first, the second was about guns. Anybody know what the third is? It's that you shouldn't be legally obligated to quarter soldiers in your home. And I think that's really important to recognize, right? They were in an environment where they maybe could not have imagined a Citizens United world, or they couldn't have imagined the internet and the way that speech gets amplified and how certain people can have power over speech. And so I just think that is really important, right? That was number 3. That was the third most important thing, that you can't quarter soldiers in your home. I like to say that I'm a Third Amendment absolutist. No soldiers in my home. I'm an American. But more importantly than that, we have other civil liberties that are law, including the 14th Amendment, which prohibits discrimination, especially against marginalized people, which codifies the right to equal protection under the law. And that's something that I think we really need to be focused on in libraries, that how are we making sure that our environments are protective of people who need it the most, the people who are most discriminated against in our society. Further, the core values of librarianship, when you take them all together, actually acknowledge a lot of these other things. So this is the core values of librarianship, right? It was adopted in like 1930 originally, but this is the most recent update in 2019 from ALA Council, right? And obviously intellectual freedom is in there. It's a huge one. But what else is in there? Diversity, democracy, social responsibility, which I think would be better if it was social justice, but fine, I'll take it where I can get it, right? The public good, you know, there are all these other things that I think acknowledge the spirit of other civil liberties, like the 14th Amendment. And I think go even further than that. So thinking about all of our values and context and how we're living all of them together, I think can really support us through this environment where some of these values are really uniquely challenged. So now I'm finally at the toolkit part of this, and we have 20 minutes left. So we're gonna get to what I can get to, right? And then come to my afternoon workshop, it's gonna be great. So, the Library Defense Toolkit. The first thing I wanna say about this is that one of the things I'm gonna say first is like, don't take the opposition's messaging. Don't let them define the terms of the conversation, like let's be positive and blah, blah, blah. And here I am like using the word defense in my own slides, right? I get really stuck on this one. I don't want it to be like offense, I'm like sports and military metaphors, but I just want to recognize that it is really hard not to be in that kind of defensive mindset. Even I struggle with it all the time. But anyway. So the components of this toolkit: messaging, policy, coalition building, staff support, training, board matters, and then finally legislation. So we'll get to what we get to. I'll stop like at 10 minutes to the hour, see if there are any questions, and if there aren't, we can keep going through them. So I said this at the beginning, but I think this is worth repeating because people might be like, how did you come up with this? You know, it wasn't just my own stellar ideas, right? This is part of going around the country and speaking with and to librarians who are in these contexts, and a lot of them who are facing really, really serious challenged environments. I was really heartened to learn that it doesn't seem to be that bad here, and maybe some people's experiences are a bit different, but I know I'm seeing, sorry, some raised eyebrows at that one. Okay, fine. So, the few people that I spoke to were like, it's fine. But there are some places, I mean, frankly, you know, it's not Florida, right? It's not Texas, it's not Arizona. Not to say that your problems are not serious, right? And obviously, we're talking about an environment that is not going away. But so this toolkit is the result of a lot of our strategizing together, figuring out the sorts of things that are working for us, as well as the things that people wish they had, you know, the kind of stuff where they're like, I wish my administration would just do this. I wish that my director would just recognize this. What I said at the beginning about like how it's very rare to have a whole conference that's just focused on these issues, it's not even just that. There are unfortunately a lot of libraries around the country that have their heads in the sand about these issues. Or they're stuck in the kind of like, there was an op-ed that was published, I think like 6 months ago in the Washington Post, and it was some former ALA people and some ACLU people, and I think this op-ed is like totally indicative of some of the wrong-headedness about this issue. The op-ed was basically like, well, if these people just knew what the library was for, they would be okay. They don't know what the library is for. Yeah, they do. They know what the library is for and they're against it, right? Anyway, I digress. So this is what's working for us and the things that we wish we had. So the first thing is our messaging. You know, the opposition's messaging is all about how we're like groomers and pedophiles and like other really frankly sick and untrue things. And we can really easily get in the kind of defensive mindset where we're just like responding to that and we're like, well, that's not true, we're not that. And almost never should we actually be addressing that directly. Instead, and the other thing is, Emily Drabinski, the incoming ALA president, loves to repeat this, that like this challenge environment, this environment of hostility has forced us to talk about their agenda. And it's working. And we have to reject that, and we have to talk about our own agenda. You know, something that I don't think we'll have the time for in the afternoon workshop, but something that I've been doing with a lot of librarians around the country is just like a very like cheesy but lovely messaging activity about like, what is our positive agenda? What do we want to tell the world about ourselves? You know, rejecting the opposition's narrative, affirmative of our values and our communities, especially those community members who are being targeted in this environment. Some pieces of that I think are worth noting, you know, that our opposition is small and most people love the library. I can't repeat that enough. That the library stands for intellectual freedom, diversity, inclusion, welcoming spaces, democracy, fun, wholesomeness. And then just thinking about the things that we do that are great and making that part of the discussion instead of what these people want to say about us. If you do feel the need to address any of the opposition's messaging, I think the situations that call for that are like, if one of your staff is getting targeted directly, if they're trying to say, oh, this person is like a sick person, just condemning it outright. We condemn what these people are saying. It's false and like sick, and here's who we actually are. One thing I want to note, this comes up all the time because this is such a big piece of the opposition's messaging. These are my rights as a parent, right? What about parents' rights? Well, first of all, there are all kinds of parents in our communities, right? And as such, we don't make parenting decisions. You know, we don't impose any parenting ideology or method. We don't act in loco parentis with our materials as well as in our spaces, right? And so we have many materials that may be right for your family and many that are right for other families, and the implication of that is you're not gonna take away the things that are right for those other families. Kind of related to policy is our messaging. All the different ways that we should be embedding our values, you know, our library values as well as other civil liberties into our policy. So the first one, and this is another one that I got some direct feedback from my First Amendment lawyer friend. I said, listen, are we allowed to say, you know, because we know that a lot of these opposition members, they want to act like if we say in the code of conduct, you can't harass people, they want to be like, well, it's my free speech right to harass. Well, it's actually not in this environment. The library is allowed to define what behaviors are acceptable in here. So I think our codes of conduct should start with, first of all, starting with the positive stuff, the welcoming environment. What are the behaviors that we want in the library? what is this space actually for? And then getting into what we will not tolerate. So no tolerance for harassment, and defining specifically what we mean by harassment. Specific behaviors like crowding around staff, adults at story time without children, thinking about how much there are folks who are showing up at story times. Filming is a challenging one because there are some states that have a one-party consent law, right? Where they're like, you can actually film someone without their consent. I don't know what the law is here, but I recommend that you look it up, right? Because if it's a two-party consent law, you can actually prohibit filming in the library. One thing that is a really good catch-all is failure to follow reasonable staff requests. And then something that I really encourage you to also look up of your local statute is there are many states that have a statute, I see some people nodding, so maybe there is one in North Carolina, that prohibit interference with the library operation. This is the Nebraska one, just as an example, right? It gives public libraries the power to regulate the use of the library. And putting that part of the code right in your code of conduct is really good. It's not gonna necessarily, it's a deterrent against these people. It will stop a lot of them. It might give some of them something that they want to fight about with their local legislators, but then it's not your problem anymore. Other policy stuff, obviously collection development, and I just want to plug that I see that there is a session at 3 p.m. just about using your collection development policy. Hey, over here. Just using your collection development policy to support you in this. So, I'm not going to say too much about it, but obviously, noting in the collection development policy that the library collects a diversity of viewpoints, right? A bigger lift, and there are some libraries that I see trying to work this into their collection development policies, and maybe you guys have this on your agenda, addressing stereotyping or bias or disinfo harder, and in some ways might be a flag for the opposition to go after. They love disinformation, so they might be like, oh, how could, you're talking about me in here. Talking about the library only collecting credible sources, that's also sort of there's some wiggle room in there, but I think it's something worth us figuring out how we can do this. Materials challenges, also, there's a virtual session on Monday. I love this conference. One of the best challenge policy templates that I have seen, that I have in my resource list, comes from Book Riot, who is, they're really doing some of the best work keeping track of the challenge environment that we're in. If you want to see all the stories of where this is happening, plus they have a lot of the positive stuff too. Book Riot is doing phenomenal work. And they created the best materials challenge policy that I've seen, which basically is, it bureaucratizes the whole reconsideration request in a way that puts so much work on the challenger that it kind of at least buys you a bunch of time and takes away, they have to really be motivated. So a few things that the Book Riot policy covers. One, it basically requires a book report from the challenger. One thing that we know, yeah, it's amazing, that a lot of these groups, Moms for Liberty is one, they maintain databases of challenge language, right? So a lot of these books are not read. We know this already. They're just flipping right to the page with the PG-13 content, and they're hyper-focused on that. So this materials challenge policy says, did you read the book, yes or no, right? But then it's what did you not like about the book? What do you think the literary merits of the book are? And all these other things. And if they leave any part of it unaddressed, the whole challenge is void. The other things that I think are really good about this policy is that it outlines a timeline, the committee contact points, basically all the things about how a challenge is reconsidered. And so it means that you don't have to spend as much time interfacing with the person. Ideally, you want your challenges to be handled by professional librarians, but I recognize that a lot of places have governing boards, right? If you have a governing board, make them the last resort, and then we're gonna get into stuff that you should be training your boards on in the afternoon session. Okay, I wanna pause and note that it is 10:22, so I wanna offer any time for questions now. Yes. Do we have a microphone? Yeah, Claire's got the microphone.
Okay.
It might not be on.
Testing. There we go.
There it is, yeah.
All right. First off, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
This is research for me right now because I just found out that my proposal for the NCLA conference, this is coming up in October, I was going to do a presentation titled Libraries Under Siege, A Call to Activism. So I will be attending your
Yeah, take my
workshop.
slides, just use them. I don't
Yeah,
care.
no,
Yeah.
I was gonna, having worked, before I was a librarian, I was a certified paralegal, worked in a law library, so I'm all about making sure that we're following fair use laws.
Citations needed, exactly.
And I'm gonna see if we have a North Carolina statute
Yeah, great.
about.
Let me know, because I'll put it in we're trying to keep track of them.
I will send you, as soon as I find it, and I
Cool.
will
Yeah.
find it, if it's there. What I wanted to say, and I realize I'm going to get some pushback on this because I understand all my fellow librarians in this, but I understand why in your comments that you want to avoid what I call war speech or battle speech. Full disclosure, I have a military background. I'm a martial artist. We're at war, folks.
Yeah.
We are at war, and we need to start acting like it. Now, we can moderate our language. We can be smart about it. But I just want to say that we do have to put on our armor here, and we need to be ready to fight. That's it.
Yeah, I think that's a valid comment. Thank you for that. I mean, I think that's a reasonable position. I think what I'm concerned about is when we're only defensive and when we're responsive only, like we're reactive to them instead of, creating any kind of offensive position, because I think that makes us lose, and it puts us at a disadvantage for sure. I see a question over here.
Hi, I was just wondering if there's any kind of proactive legislative measures that could be taken or are being taken in some way to defend libraries.
There are a couple of states, and I'm so bad at remembering the exact, what's happening with legislation, but I know that there are at least a couple that are introduced. I don't know where they're at with it, but what I want to point you to, and again, I have this in my resource list, is every library has a legislation tracker, and they're just keeping track of all the legislation impacting libraries. So I believe they have any potential positive ones. I wish I could remember. I don't know if anybody here knows. Illinois. It's Illinois. Illinois, yes. Illinois, and I think it just passed through the House or something. It's moving, right? It's going well. And that was an effort of a lot of coalition, civil society, and civil rights groups. But I want to just plug every library's legislation tracker again, and just every library in general. John Traska is a good friend of mine, and his mind for remembering what is happening in each state is incredible. So you can email him directly, and he lives in Illinois, so he knows about that one a lot. Any other questions? Sure, comments are welcome too, but let's get the microphone to you. Sorry, wait, before you read, can we just get the microphone? Yeah.
That Mobs for Liberty is having their legislative day. Actually, they just had it on the 17th for North Carolina and Raleigh. And hang on one second. The Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson, was the speaker at their legislative day.
Hiss. Yes. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I think that is really illustrative of the point, right? It is not a big movement, but it's an organized one, and they know their legislators, they're in front of them, they know who's on their side, and they're showing up to stuff, so we need to do the same, for sure. And we're gonna be talking in the afternoon workshop about the legislative stuff and about what kind of efforts we can do there with coalitions and with legislation. I think maybe there was a question over here. Yeah, let's get you a mic.
I was just making sure you're going to share this PowerPoint?
Definitely.
Question mark?
Yeah.
Okay. I could not write fast enough. So.
No, I know. I'm going to send it to Claire, or you can email me directly. I don't know if you want to say something.
Yeah, we will have all our slides on Sketch, which is on our website. So we'll send out an email reminder about that.
Yeah, so I will definitely share the slides. And in addition to that, I have, like I said, a resource list that has anything that I referred to, like the book riot, challenge policy, other things that I'm gonna get to in the afternoon workshop. I have links to all of those. And then because I talked so much this morning, like the afternoon workshop, there were other things that I had planned that we will not get to, but I'll give you guys the slides for that too. And like truly feel free to reuse them for whatever. Like you can just take this slide presentation and reuse it. I don't care. So get the information out there. I think we have like 2 minutes left on this, so I'll see. I think there's one more question over here.
I'm just going to lecture you. I firmly believe what we're doing here is the good fight. Freedom and fear do not live together in the same house. They cannot. You cannot be free if you're afraid. I know what we're facing is scary. Angry people who are very, very upset about something that they don't fully understand. Mm-hmm. And in the moment when they accost you, it can be incredibly intense. But we're educated, way better than they are most of the time. We're smarter than them. We work with the public every day. We have seen some stuff. We're going to be okay. We just have to have ourselves ready and prepared for this. But please don't be afraid, because we are actually on the right side of things. So remember that. Freedom and fear, they don't work together. So in order to protect our freedom, we have to be fearless about this. Sorry for the lecture.
No, it's cool. I think that requires some applause, definitely. We are on the right side of history, you know? I mean, and I think I'm gonna talk about some of this stuff in the afternoon, but like, that really should motivate us, that the history of these kinds of censorship efforts have been the same types of people. There was a great article in Bloomberg recently where they had this whole thing about how the Daughters of the Confederacy were starting some of the first book banning efforts in like the 1920s against public libraries, using the same rhetoric, going after the same types of materials. And so these people are always going to be in some form trying to oppose us, but what we're doing is promoting a democratic and pluralistic society, and I think that's what we all want to live in. So anyway, thank you everybody for your time now, and I hope to see you in the afternoon workshop. If not, I hope you go to one of the other amazing sessions. So yeah, thank you all so much.